Everybody, welcome.
Ta-da!
Ta-da! Asking for more podcast. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm so excited today to talk with you. Sean Goode of Challenge 180. Please tell us who you are.
Choose 180. Choose
Sorry,
180.
Choose 180. I'm proud of me. Choose 180. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, no, it's we're an organization that emboldens young people to make a choice, which can often be a challenge, to commit to a new direction. So there's absolutely synergy between both of those words. Yeah, so I steward this nonprofit in the greater Seattle area, Choose 180, where we work to transform systems that cause harm and support young people who have been impacted by those systems. And outside of that space, I am the father of two incredible young people, a 20-year-old college sophomore of a son and a 14-year-old freshman of a daughter. And I'm married to the most amazing woman in the world. She's my gift from God, my angel from heaven, the love of my life, the woman of my dreams, my favorite part of every day that ends in Y. I'm a connoisseur of dad jokes. I collect Star Wars Legos and vintage action figures. And I have survived 40 years in this world as a multiracial Black man. And I'm grateful to be in space with you today.
Thank you so much, Sean. I have a terrible dad joke to tell you. Would you like to hear it?
I'm here for it.
Okay. So the Grim Reaper and you are having a pillow fight, but never challenge him unless you're ready for the Reaper cushions.
Yeah. When you said it was terrible, you delivered on that. So we must exchange now.
Please tell me the terrible joke.
I mean, it's kind of actually rooted in reality. So my son's away at college, and his car has been sitting for months, and the air in his back tire is all the way out. And I was reminiscing that there was a time where you could put air in a car tire for free. And now it costs like almost $2 or so to like fill up a tire. And that is absolutely what I call inflation.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Oh man. Sorry, I'm just like time out. I have something in the oven. I need to take it out. I will be right back.
Yeah. No worries.
I enjoyed the joke.
Thanks, Jana.
Thanks, Jana. Yeah, okay. So when we first talked, the reason I wanted to talk with you is because I'd seen you talking about the work that you're doing with helping everybody at your organization be paid a living wage for Seattle, but not just a living wage, a fair wage to actually be able to own a home someday. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. First, and whenever I start these conversations, I really want to ground the people who are listening in some truths. One of the truths that's important that we're grounded in is the work that we're doing around wage equity isn't revolutionary in the grand scheme of things in our community. There's organizations who started out in a more equitable way, who were paying people a more livable wage when they began the formation of their cause. What we've done is perpetuate a harm over a 10-year period of time by under-resourcing the folks who are serving faithfully day in and day out to support young people in our community, and using the market to justify under-resourcing them because some imaginary line had been drawn that was determining the value of people serving in nonprofit spaces. And so often in these conversations, Choose 180 or the commitment that I helped lead, once the staff really like brought this and centered this and demanded this in a really respectful way, is often celebrated or lifted up. And I think that the reason why that is often is because we were getting it wrong for so long, like so many of us are. And because we were getting it wrong, we had to get it right. And I think that commitment to getting it right is appreciated and should be acknowledged, but not any more than those that have got it right from jump. Folks in our region like Creative Justice, Collective Justice, and Freedom Project, to name a few, who, as they formed their causes, formed it with equity in mind.
I really appreciate you framing it that way, because honestly, and this is the thing that I want everyone to take away from today, we are under-resourcing our folks if we continue to try to pay them the market rate, which is often much lower than what they really should be making. And instead start thinking about, you know, how could we all get paid and ask for more, just as workers. And if we all truly do have inherent worth and dignity, why isn't that borne out by the structure of our organizations, if not the structure of society? So I feel like this is a really good thing to share, and I really appreciate that you shared.
Yeah, no, well, it is an imperative, it's a moral imperative to resource people in a way that allows them to live and fully engage in capitalism in a way that allows them to generate wealth. I mean, we can have, I'm not a finance guy. I don't have an MBA from an Ivy League institution. What I do know is that if you're going to be able to benefit from capitalism, you have to first have capital. And we have an economy that's predicated upon a presumption that anyone can benefit if they're able to gain enough capital to engage in the system and play the game. But unfortunately, particularly in our country, from the formation of it all, Black folks in particular, or specifically, I should say, were the capital at the foundation of capitalism. So historically, it's been near impossible for us to benefit because we haven't had the resources to even engage, although we were the resource that created the landscape and the infancy of it all.
Say it again. Yeah, I mean, and we can link this in the show notes, but there was a bit on I think it was the Daily Show, a few years ago now, where this guy went around Boston and he asked folks, hey, how much wealth do you think that there is in the Black community versus the white community? And people were like, oh, I don't know, it's probably similar. And he's like, $12 versus 100,000, basically.
Yeah. In the book, The Color of Money, it emphasizes that Black families hold a nickel of wealth to the dollar that white families hold, a nickel, which is, in part, like, directly ties into this conversation around nonprofit wages and the decision that we made. And when I say we, like, it really is a we decision. This decision that was made wasn't made because I woke up with some sort of benevolent mentality one morning and said, this is the altruistic thing to do, the righteous thing to do, we will do this. That's not the way that it all came together, and I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about that. But like, one of the motivating factors for me was the fact that, and is the fact that, we are an organization that largely employs Black and brown folks. And as a Black man that's stewarding an organization that's employing Black and brown folks, like, if I am creating a landscape for them to be underpaid and under-resourced, then I'm contributing to the very same inequities that we're working to combat. And the duplicity of all of that is deeply problematic at best and sinister at worst.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really glad you brought that up. And you said this was an employee-led initiative. Can you say more about how it started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it begins with the pandemic. And in March 2020, a lot of things changed for everybody in our world. And particularly in companies that had people who were meeting in person and doing in-person work, everything changed dynamically. And for our organization, for the time that we've been in existence, and as we built to the team that we have today, we've been a pretty great place to work, in my opinion. We paid above market rate wages, on generally speaking, and we're a Black-led nonprofit that's largely employing Black and brown folks, many folks with lived experiences. We're transforming systems that cause harm. We're on the cutting edge of justice reform and supporting young people who have been impacted and demonstrating terrific results. And we're doing all of the right things for all of the right reasons. So people have been drawn to the cause. They wanted to work for the cause. They love the community that we've created and fostered from within. And so much of that was predicated on like being able to be in community with each other, and to be able to serve young people in person and in our group settings, and all of those things disappeared in March of 2020. And because they disappeared, people went home and they were working from their bedrooms or their living rooms or their dining room tables. And young people were no longer engaging with us in person. They were on the other side of a screen on Zoom or FaceTime or whatever other way that we leaned in to make it happen. And so many of those touch points that were affirming, that created this culture and this dynamic workspace, begin to slowly fade away. And as those things began to wear, it's my conviction what was left behind was some harm that we had been causing unintentionally, that was really covered up by the shiny exterior of all the cool things and the cool culture that we had fostered. Because even if you're able to meet with people in person and be a part of a great community and see life change, it doesn't mean that you should make less than a living wage because you get to experience these other things. It's not an either or type of dynamic. But I wasn't really clued into any of that, because in my nonprofit experience, people who do direct service make less money, and that usually people, when you tell them you work for a nonprofit, they'll say things like, "Thank you for doing that work. That's really vital. That's really important. We're glad that you're doing that," which is all like nods to the fact that they're pretty sure you're not making like a great wage, so you're taking a hit to make community better, right? So there's all these things, all these personal narratives that I own. But in the midst of it all, some of our staff members begin to speak up, and they begin to say like, "Hey, like I need to make more. I can't afford to live where I'm living now with my wage." And it was consistent. And really the first people to speak up were folks that were part of dominant culture, who, because of their inherited privilege, felt like they had they had the ability to take up space in that way without putting themselves at risk. And as folks would speak up and advocate, eventually I got to the point I said, "Look, we'll take a look at it, but we're going to do it all at once. So we're not going to make a whole bunch of one-off changes for this person or that person. Whatever we do, we're going to make it organizational wide." And so we by the pleading and prodding of our team members, and it shouldn't have taken as much as it did, but it did, and I acknowledge that. We convened a committee from the board, and they did a compensation evaluation and a philosophy assessment to figure out what is it that like we are paying folks, and what is it that folks desire, what is it that they want. And after doing this, there were some things that were just through lines. Folks wanted to know, how do we value lived experience over college education, and how do we value time served at the organization, and how big should the gaps be between a manager and a director, and someone doing direct service and a manager, and most of all, can we get to a living wage? And in our region, a living wage in Seattle sits at around $73,000 to $74,000 a year, and south of Seattle, anywhere between 68 and 70. And so looking at that, folks, we're essentially asking for $70,000 a year at a minimum within our cause. And I agreed with them in principle. When the report was given to me, I said, absolutely, I agree. And we're a nonprofit organization. It's just not how things function. And so I took the report and we looked at wages and said, okay, well, we might be able to make some, small changes here or there to make sure that we're stay above market, but like we're a nonprofit organization. And it was budget season for us. And so we were simultaneously working on the budget. And I always tell our leaders, when you're building the budget, to dream, right? Build a budget based upon what you'd love to see, and then we'll scale back to what we can see, right? Based upon the restrictions. And as I was telling them to dream, I told them to, if you think there's staff we need, just think about what that would look like. And one of our team members came back to me and said, look, I feel it's a misalignment in values if we're willing to add staff while simultaneously not paying other staff a living wage. And then we had a really terse conversation about this, and when it went several rounds back and forth about where we agree and disagree. And I'm grateful for their persistence in continuing to challenge my thinking. And so we got to the end of the conversation. I said, look, I'll look it up. I'll take a look and see what we can do. I began to crunch the numbers, and then I went to talk to a couple of our team members that happened to be in person in the office. I heard their experience, and asked one of them, could you ever imagine like buying a house for you and your daughter? And she laughed at me because she was so far removed from that possibility. Another one of our team members was talking about the challenge they have with their student loans. And what was clear to me was a couple things. Number one, like, I am out of touch with the experience that our team is having because I'm farthest removed from the pain point. And executive leaders within nonprofits and within corporations are typically those that are farthest away from the pain point. And when you're not proximate to where it hurts, it's difficult to understand what people are experiencing. And when I began to hear the testimony of our team, after reflecting on what it would take to make it happen, I acknowledged that the only thing that was in the way of this coming to fruition was me. My inability to create this possibility for the team that I'm stewarding, I was the only thing in the way. Of course, we need to find more resources. Of course, we need to figure out how to make it sustainable. But ultimately, what was in the way was me. And if I stepped out the way and brought it to the board, undoubtedly people would be on board, because we have been causing harm and perpetuating an injustice within an organization that's working to transform systems of injustice.
And that's called mission mirroring. Yes. And I've experienced that too. Yes.
Yeah.
I love how clear and simple you make it. And I hope everyone listening to this, thinking about their own organization, oh, my boss would never, just really takes in what you're saying. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. And I've talked to a whole bunch of different organizations since we made the announcement. And sometimes I'll get emails from people who say things like, well, I'm just a program manager, or I'm just, doing direct service. And I'm like, no. If it wasn't for the people who were serving the cause, like, this would have never happened. It happened because the people who were closest to the pain point spoke up and said, this hurts. And they persisted, unfortunately, with great, intentionality, because their leader, me, couldn't hear what could be, because I was so fixated on what always has been. This nonprofit industrial complex that continues to take advantage of folks who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and women who are largely serving in these spaces by paying less than a living wage to serve people who are on the margins, while they're one check away from being on the margins themselves.
That's right. That's honestly, the last 2 years have seemed like a crisis of ethics inside of the nonprofit industrial complex, where people are starting to see some of these, I say people from the dominant culture are starting to see some of these deep hypocrisies and inequities in our system. And I'm really, really glad that you're just making it super clear. You're not helping if you're perpetuating one step away from poverty with your workers.
Yeah. I mean, if imagine if you were like a humane society, right? And for every animal that you rescued, you released another one back to the street. Like, who would invest in that type of work? Every animal you rescued, another one was released.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you're actually not solving for a thing. Performatively, it looks great. The veneer is beautiful, but in application, you're causing harm with your right hand and healing with your left. Like, at best, that's a net zero gain.
Yeah.
And what we've seen year over year, particularly in these nonprofit spaces, is often it's causing more hurt than what the benefit actually is.
That's right. And I can only speak for the research I've seen on the fundraising sector and how often fundraising jobs turn over. But what I can tell you from that is that it costs 117% of someone's salary to replace them in fundraising. And if you have replacement over 3 years running, you lose $600,000. Whereas if you keep someone, you gain $500,000. And furthermore, the number one reason, according to the donor centered leadership book by Signet Research, the number one reason people leave is salary, from a survey of CEOs of nonprofits. So yeah. If you think you cannot ignore, if you think you ignore this, it's bad for your bank account to ignore this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not only pragmatic in the fact that people deserve to make a wage that allows them to live in the neighborhoods that they're serving, right? Like people deserve that opportunity to not simultaneously be in service and be a client. Like they deserve that. I worked for a large nonprofit and I oversaw summer camps that I could not afford based on my salary to register my own children for, right? That's not okay. And the fact that we've made that okay is deeply problematic. But as you're speaking directly to, if you raise the wages and you make sure that you're doing the other things to create a safe and thriving work environment, people will stay longer, and that cost of replacement is no longer factors in. And every moment that a job goes vacant, there's a deliverable that's likely tied to a grant or some sort of commitment that's not being made manifest, which puts your long-term funding at risk in the first place. Not to mention, in this era of the Great Resignation, right, it's really difficult to fill roles that are less than a living wage. People would much rather not work and live in poverty than to work and live in poverty. Right? So, you know, again, like no MBA, I'm not an economics guy. What I am is somebody who has enough lived experience to understand what it's like to sleep in my car and go into work the next morning. And I understand what it's like to lead an organization and be paying a mortgage on my house. And I know that the difference between where I was when I was sleeping in my car and where I am now paying my mortgage has less to do with who I was as a person and more to do with what I'm earning at this juncture of my life. And for those of us that would say, well, you know, we all have to go through some hardship to get to a place of flourishing, or, you know, we've all worked those low paying jobs. I ask the question, how many of us think that if there's a cure for a disease that comes to the surface, that people should still suffer absent of the cure, even if it's available? You know, I don't think we live in a region where there's a lack of resources. I think if anything, there's a lack of will. But I believe that that's beginning to turn as folks who are serving in these spaces recognize that their value isn't only to be compensated by the great feeling they get through their service or the culture of the place that they serve, but there is a dollar amount ascribed to your hourly rate that should be honoring your existence as a human in a way that allows you to live and thrive in the space that you serve in.
I agree with you. 2 days ago, I taught a webinar on the Great Resignation, and I had a lot of managers there. And I said, pay people more, pay people more, pay people more. And I got pushback. And they said, so what are we supposed to do if we don't have more in the budget?
Yeah.
I had some ideas, but I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that we often prioritize programming over people. And what we'll do is we'll see how much we can get done with as little as possible. Now, that's a scarcity mentality that's grounded in some fallacies that aren't actually true. I believe that philanthropy, small, big, and everything in between, follows the nonprofit sector. And so as nonprofits go, so does philanthropy go. And it's not the other way around. We've spent way too much time chasing after donors and foundations, and that's not actually how this thing works. When, as an organization, we stop chasing after people and just continue to do great work and publicly do great work and honor a commitment to our community, people begin coming after us. And they, when they're with us for the journey and not just for the moment. And so I think that's one element of it. The other element of it is this, is that if you can't afford to pay people a living wage and stand up as many programs as you're offering, then I would recommend that you begin to pull back some of your programming to pay people a living wage, because you want to build something that's sustainable and not something that's temporary. Too often, nonprofit organizations exist today and are gone tomorrow because they didn't build a sustainable practice. What's very difficult to build something sustainable if you're not paying sustainable wages to the people who are doing the work day in and day out. And so it has to start with the people who you're serving within the cause before you begin to think about who you're serving outside of the cause. Because if the people inside aren't healthy and on a healing journey, they can't possibly do well to serve those who are outside the cause that need to heal and experience health.
That's right. That's right. Thomas Merton says the frenzy of the activist neutralizes his work for peace. And I really like that saying, because it kind of goes back to take care of your own house first before you look outside of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know what I mean? So one of the people in the webinar said, we have a contract we have to fulfill, and we only have a certain amount, that we can give people under that contract. And what do? And I told her, go back and talk to your funder, or, the municipality that you're doing social work underneath, and have a conversation about how life has changed since we signed this piece of paper. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And also we have to have honest conversations with the municipality around the fact that they're often subcontracting out work that they don't want to do for far less wages than what they'd have to pay if the people work within that municipality.
That's
And
right.
so if our tax dollars are going to pay a lesser wage for someone who, if they served in the county, would make, then we need to speak up and say something about that, and make sure that the budgets that we're submitting when we're submitting these grants are reflective of the wages would be for a county employee, including benefits and retirement and all the other features that are typically aligned there. This story, this narrative that nonprofits should pay less because they're doing charitable work is rooted in a history that's not relevant to the present. There was a time where nonprofits weren't staffing folks who would also likely be the client at one point in time. We put such an emphasis in nonprofit hiring practices now to bring on people with lived experiences, to bring on people who are reflective of the population we're serving. We're not bringing on people who have been born into affluence and have the capacity to volunteer, so they're just going to take a small wage to offset some of the inconveniences. We're employing people who are directly from the neighborhoods of the young people or the adults or the community that we're serving. And if we're going to do that, then we need to understand that we can't expect them to find other ways to compensate for their lack of wage while committing their lives to a very important and at times exhausting work.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That is so true. And so to those executive directors who say my board would never go for it, what do you say to them?
Well, I question how aligned the board is with your mission and vision. I mean, for us, this was a justice issue. And once we understood it as a justice issue, it was an obvious decision to make. I have yet to talk to a nonprofit executive, CEO, or board chair since we've made this announcement that after talking with me said, this is impossible. I've talked to some folks that said, okay, this is going to take some time. I've talked to some folks that said, okay, we need to figure out how to get there. But I've yet to talk to anybody that said, nope, there's no way we can do this. Everybody has a desire to do right. That's why you're serving in this space. Well, that doing right has to begin with those who are serving with you every single day. And if you're on a nonprofit board and you're listening to this, I hope that you feel convicted in some manner. We're not an organization that's flush with cash, that has people knocking down our door every day with bags and saying, here, please take more, please take more. But what we are is an organization that's steadfast and unapologetically committed to doing right on behalf of our young people, doing right on behalf of our families, and doing right on behalf of those that are serving within our cause every single day.
That seems pretty straightforward to me. I love how you sum it up. And I love that you're not backing down from any potential objections for this. I think that it's a really powerful moment that we're having with the Great Resignation, where people can actually demand more. I talked with a recruiter a week or so ago, and he said, what we have right now is the talent war, and we've been doing it since January 2021 for fundraisers in Canada, for example. And he's like, people who take a long time to hire someone have to rethink how they're hiring. He's like, people who want to offer very little have to rethink that too. So I really, really hope that people who are listening to this are listening to your words and are understanding as human beings, it's time. As money managers, it's time. I mean, there's so many reasons why this makes sense. Would you like to add anything else about what you learned from this process, or what you would advise people to do as they start it?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think the worst thing you can do is immediately go look at your budget and see what salary you can pay people. I think that this has to involve the team that you're supporting and those that are most proximate to the pain point. I appreciate the zealous nature of those who listen to something like this and say, well, we got to do something now. I would pause, and this is difficult for me to do because I'm a person who loves action. I would pause. I would make sure that the team that you're supporting is leading the visioning process of what a compensation philosophy should look like for your cause. Hear what it is they have to say, and be as responsive to what it is that they're conveying as you possibly can be. Because you may hear this and say, great, we're going to do the same thing. And if you don't first listen to the voices of those who are impacted, you may miss altogether. You may hit on salary, but you'll miss on an opportunity to hear from people who are proximate and make sure that you're giving a comprehensive solution to what their true desire really is. The wage portion of this is just one portion of it. We're fully committed over the next year to make sure that we're filling out our philosophy so folks have a clear understanding when they join our cause what it means to be a part of Choose 180.
Mm. Yes, I completely agree. And that's an incredibly important point to make. Don't try to make solutions without involving the people that are directly affected. Just full stop forever. Just don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you said that, and I completely agree with you. And so you could be offering people, more vacation. You could be offering them more sort of like remuneration for their education or childcare, or better healthcare. There's so many other things you could be offering aside from salary, which are also important, and people don't think about that.
Yeah, and you just won't know until you ask the people what's important to them.
That's right.
Because what's important to me as executive director is dynamically different than what it's important to one of our team members that's serving in the trenches every day.
Mm-hmm.
What's important to me is like, I want to make sure that I can pay my son's college tuition, right? That it's a privilege to me to be concerned about paying my son's tuition. That's a privileged position. We have team members who wouldn't imagine what it would be like to help pay their children's tuition until we made a decision like this. And now it's a part of a conversation, right? But like, you got to be proximate to those who are really going through it in order to understand what it looks like to come out of it.
That's right. That's right. So would having people from the community on the board be helpful in this case as well?
I think it's imperative that people who are aligned with the mission on your board and not only aligned with their capacity to give or influence and things like that. Like, people should really be vested in the mission of the organization. And I think that folks that have experienced the benefit of organizations like whatever yours may be are folks that are primed to serve in board seats. I think the composition of the board, for me, what's really important is it's really held by people who get it and are there because they care deeply about the it. And they're fully persuaded that what's best for the it is what's best for all, whatever your it may be.
Yeah. I know an organization right now that has gone through some leadership transition, and the board and the new executive director are really harping on the overhead myth. And we know that's just, everything is overhead. We know that that's been proven. Did anyone come back to you, any funder or anyone, when you did this and said, but now you've increased your overhead, so we're going to pull our funding?
Absolutely not.
Great.
Again, the people who are connected to our cause are connected because they believe in what it is we're doing. Full stop. They believe in what it is that we're doing. And this is part of what we're doing as a result of who we are. And so they believe in it too. And the broader community shares a conviction of it as well. I mean, you don't have to go far to find somebody who at Thanksgiving dinner, when people are going around and saying what they do or how things have been, have had that feeling of working at a nonprofit and feeling less than, because they don't have the same lifestyle as others who live in the private space, right? Or work in the private space. Like, I mean, this isn't a foreign idea. This isn't a foreign revelation. Like, we all know what this feels like, whether because we've lived through it vicariously or we've lived through it personally. Why? And why continue? And why continue to assume that other people don't get it? The overhead thing is an absolute myth. Like the work doesn't happen without people.
That's it.
How is it going to get done? Right? We're not creating machines in a factory here. Right? Like that's not the jam. Our thing is people. So we have to invest in people to serve people. And if you want the best people to do the service, you have to be willing to resource the best.
Yes. Or invest in the people you already have.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And I think like when I say resource the best, the emphasis there is that like they shouldn't be working with you if they weren't the best people to serve in those spaces. I think like, you know, like I find that in every context that I've served in, if people are serving in a nonprofit space because of the wage and the nonprofit industrial complex, it's because they care deeply and that's where they want to be. It's just, it shouldn't have to be self-sacrificing to do that. You shouldn't be taking a pledge of poverty in order to serve your community.
And there's reasons why we expect this. There's structural reasons. It's not personal. You know, it's feminized labor. It can often be, you know, racialized as well. It can be, you know, patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, intersections of oppression, Puritanism coming in on top and saying, if you have money, you're smart and good and you deserve it. And if you don't have money, you're stupid and wrong and you don't deserve it, you know? So like, this is what keeps us stuck in these cycles.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, I regularly think of my mother, right? I think of my mother who held multiple college degrees, but because of my father and his abusive nature, we were running around unhoused for a bit. And once we found a house, we were really unstable because I was a very difficult child because of a lot of the trauma that I had already seen and was still surviving through. And so it made it difficult to stay in any one place at any given time, which meant it was really difficult for her to hold down a good job that would pay well because of all the instability in her life. My mother worked brilliant, but was working at, you know, retail stores and coffee stands and was making less than a living wage so much of the time. And it wasn't because her labor wasn't valuable. It was because her labor wasn't valued.
that's right.
And that's not okay. And we can do something about that. We just have to. And I say we, I mean all of us, any one of us that are in these spaces. We just have to speak up and say something because all of us have been experiencing it. You know, it's kind of like the bystander effect, right? Like how long are we going to watch this harm be perpetuated before somebody speaks up and like says something like, please stop doing that. That hurts. And I think like in this moment, our organization was an organization that was causing harm and said, hey, we're going to stop doing this because it hurts. And this is how we got to the place of understanding the impact. And we're encouraging others to join us on this journey towards economic justice to make sure that we reset the market in a way that honors the humanity of those that are serving in these spaces.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you're going to speak at the career conference about this, and that we're also going to have a couple other folks speak with you on a panel about how we can have more democratic workplace structures using the co-op model, as well as what unions can do for nonprofit workers as well. And I'm so excited about this session because, I mean, those are just different structures of power. Like if people don't want to listen to you, maybe a union will make them listen. You know, like how do we make these structures of power open and transparent instead of pretending that, oh no, this is just how it's always been, you know, how power obscures itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to share space with both my co-panelists and to be able to impart whatever it is that we have to offer to those that tap in. And thanks for creating the space for that and being so inviting and welcoming for these types of ideas.
I'm only one person, but I want to do what I can do. And I love what you're doing and I want everyone to know about it. That's why I asked you here today.
Well, please know that there's no such thing as only one person. If that were the case, we all would be only one person. But like in the miracle that you are, because that's exactly what today is. And that each one of those inhales and exhales as they manifest themselves are evidence of you are more than one person. You are part of a humanity and our collective humanity. When we're grounded in that, these things that we're talking about today become simple because the focus is on what's best for us and not just what's best for me.
That is deep. Thank you. I think
Thank
everyone should
you.
really hear that, feel it. Ah. I'm almost gonna cry. I'm gonna try not to. Thank you. If anyone listening wants to know more about you, where can they go find more?
Yeah, you can find our organization at I Choose 180. That's ICHOOSE 180 on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm really intentional on following up with folks there, and my name's Sean Goode. It's not like John Smith. There's not a ton of me out there, so you should be able to find me on LinkedIn if you so desire. And please just invite you to join us on this journey towards justice, and together there is no greater power than the collective us.
Thank you.